Welcome back everybody, my name is Nick930 and this is my review for Cyanide Studios' narrative-driven horror mystery, Call of Cthulhu. In Call of Cthulhu, players take control of private investigator Edward Pierce in the year 1924. After being given an assignment to investigate the death of the mysterious Hawkins family, Pierce travels to a gloomy place called Darkwater Island. But as Pierce discovers more about the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Hawkins' death, it becomes clear that something supernatural is at play. Since this game is so heavily based around mystery and its story, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I will say that nothing about the story is really that innovative or special. Throughout my playthrough, I couldn't help but feel a sense of deja vu, as if I had already played the game before. The idea of having a ton of flashbacks and scenes that could be real but are never confirmed to be real is just a played out concept, and this game's reliance on these overused ideas really hurts its overall value. Call of Cthulhu's story wouldn't feel as derivative if it had some decent gameplay to back it up. But unfortunately, this game is devoid of anything more than just walking around small environments, feeling around the corners for interactable clues, and then moving to the next room. The only real freedom to be had in this game comes from the narrative choices, and assigning your personality attributes. Attributes can be used to help you progress the story in a certain way. If you, for example, focus on maxing out your psychology field, you'll have more options in dialogue with characters where you'll analyze them from a psychological standpoint, which can give greater insight into the underlying problem. Attempting these dialogue choices with a lower leveled attribute can risk the character dismissing it, or even calling you out for not knowing what you're talking about. It's this role-playing mechanic that really helps Call of Cthulhu shine. Unfortunately, even these elements are dulled by the overly simplistic level structure and serious lack of interactivity. Many of the rooms in the game have clues hidden around that can only be identified by a circle indicator that appears in close proximity. Some of these clues are optional and can influence later conversations with NPCs, but some are required to progress the story, and I often found myself pacing back and forth inside rooms searching for the switch to keep the game going. There's also a sort of detective vision that functions like a low-budget version of the crime scene investigations in games like Batman Arkham Origins and Spider-Man. These detective sequences are supposed to paint a clear picture of an important event in the past, but they just feel unnecessary. These things are obvious enough that simple dialogue would have sufficed, and wouldn't drag on the pacing with weird, frost-over transition screens. Occasionally, the game will shift from its simple clue-searching phases to something resembling stealth and horror genres. I say resembling because these elements feel forced and half-baked. Many of the stealth segments force you to follow a very strict path to complete, meaning there's no room for improv to outsmart enemy patrols. You can't, for example, throw a bottle to distract a single guard, but instead need to run all over the place searching for some pills that an inmate wants, just so we can yell and get the guard's attention. Why on earth can't Pierce just yell and run around the corner? As the game progresses, there's more lovecraftian horror elements, as the game's title would imply. But in reality, these segments of the game are basically the same as the stealth action horror of games like Outlast or Alien Isolation, where you're forced to maneuver around a series of rooms while avoiding an invincible monster. But unlike those examples I gave, you can't use any tools or weapons to temporarily bypass an enemy, and are stuck relying on the game's poor sound design to hear enemies through walls and determine when it's safe to run from point to point. It just feels poorly executed, even if the enemy artistic design is very well done. And that finally brings me to the game's visuals. Call of Cthulhu is not a great looking game. It can look okay at times, especially inside buildings, but then there's the other, larger environments that just look awful. It reminds me of those pre-rendered background images used in the old Resident Evil games. Everything just looks blurry and low res. The only saving grace here are some of the okay dynamic lighting effects from things like enemy lanterns, and some decent art direction that feels right at home with the Lovecraftian theme. But all in all, it comes off as a very low-budget production. Thankfully, performance wasn't a major issue, outside of a few odd slowdowns caused by the dynamic lighting when interacting with several prison bars, and a bit of an odd stutter when pushing the right joystick just slow enough. Cyanide Studio did want me to express that the game's keyboard controls aren't functioning properly, and recommend a controller to play, but those issues should be fixed with a Day 1 patch. Other than that, there's not really much else to say about Call of Cthulhu. There's still a decent mystery along with some interesting choice-based narrative here, but it's trapped between long, boring investigation segments and lackluster stealth action horror. For the current asking price, I can't recommend Call of Cthulhu. $40 is just too much considering other, far more expansive titles available this season. If you have any questions regarding Call of Cthulhu, go ahead and ask them in the comments section. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.